for example, the most of the dimensions required for Hindu right civilizational glory to manifest in terms of the desire were more concentrated in UP, so to speak, as compared to other regions in India.
No, totally,
Uh,
totally.
while they were still of course RSS is happening in Maharashtra. You have
Yes,
a Bengali communal history wherein the dominance of Hindu cultural and festivity
yes,
symbols
of course.
within the context of the national movement. But then
Yes,
all of it is intersectionality of all of it is most concentrated in UP.
yes,
Also, you argue within your book about the fact that this is not just so to say civilization and cultural in terms of the claim, but it also political and economic. And I would like you to focus on that argument also, how did the Hindu undivided family, how did the political nature of UP as a large state contributed to the expansion of.
yeah. I no, I think this is a very important point, and it's a point which I never tire of laboring.
Hmm,
You see, because the thing is that I by my political leanings are basically off the left. I mean,
hmm,
I do have this sense of not. I mean, I would consider myself some sort of a socialist. One of the things I do find very irritating in our public discourse about the general Indian economy and the general Indian this thing is this notion of these Fabian socialists who seem to be um, people who seem to have destroyed or upset the Indian economic story.
hmm,
And one of the things which I find very curious is this, and I think there's a lot of what I call lazy thinking surrounding this point. I mean, because if you look at in the 50s, now the point is that uh, you know UP in a sense has to be held to account because UP was not only the largest state, it had a lot. It was it was a state totally dominated by the Congress throughout this period, and by a very right-wing Brahmanical kind of order, and and of course a lot of the UP congressmen, as indeed throughout the country,
hmm,
throughout North India anyway, were funded by the Marwari business communities, which
hmm,
were the Bajajis and the Birlas and whatever. And the point is that the HUF itself is a very interesting concept because it is a notion. It's the only notion. It's the only country in the world where you actually tax someone on the basis of the family, not on the basis of an individual, on their individual thing, but on the basis of the family. And also, the incident for the taxation comes at a time of division. It's not like a normal this thing. It's there. So basically, I mean, the Banchu Committee, which went into the whole thing of taxation of India in 1971, described it as a big tax dodge, whereby the Hindu um, business community were largely insulated from major taxation, both income tax, and at that time there was wealth tax and
hmm,
estate duty. So basically, the point is that certainly in the 1950s, you had a very strange situation where you had the three big sources of wealth, or people who had wealth, were the mercantile community, the royals, the Maharajas and the Nawabs and whatever, who were exempt from tax, and in fact, they drew the princely purses. And the third element were the agriculturalists. Now, again, UP and Bihar were big agricultural. The cow belt generally was largely agricultural, and large you had large landholders. Now, of course, you did have land reforms, but those land reforms were very weak. I mean, they could have up to 40 acres, and then if you divided it among your various family, friends, and whatever, you could have substantial landholdings. Now, the point is again, India is probably the only country in the world where you have zero tax on agricultural income without limit, without limit. So the point is that that if you were really a socialist sort of society, where did you get the monies,
mm,
to distribute or to create public goods? You had no money.
mm,
And this was, in a sense, a thing for stagnation. It was a recipe for stagnation. And my argument is that, this was a deliberate thing because, for example, you didn't find any interest in education. I mean, one of the things which should have been done. Now, of course, Nehru's blamed for that and said that Nehru, to be fair to him, at least as far as tertiary education, did do a good job. I mean, he set up all these IITs and IIMs and whatever. The point was that was for the good. But when it came to the at the state level, it was pathetic. I mean, for example, one draws a parallel with, say, for example, Tamil Nadu, where you had Kamaraj, who introduced in the 50s, introduced the midday meal thing for children. That encouraged children to go to school. It also improved their nutrition. It was a very basically a very good thing. And the point is that now federalism as it existed at that stage, where the states had substantial could draw upon resources which they raised, and weren't kind of crowded out with all these central schemes, could do that. But the point is, in UP, you had a situation of absolutely pathetic social indicators which continue to this day. I mean, so it's not that this thing, and therefore this argument about this so-called Fabian socialists who apparently were doing their best to the thing is just frankly a distraction. It's a distraction from the reality that a lot of the Hindu upper class had no interest in that development at all. And frankly, probably a lot of the Muslim upper class as well. I mean, whatever. I mean, not that they really had much of a say, but the Muslims were already becoming, under the spell of particular kind of, sort of thing. Muslims, I mean, to some extent, were partly there was some relief, I think, for them in the sense that in the 70s, post certainly 74, you saw the Gulf opening up and you saw a lot of opportunities for young Muslims to go, to work in the Gulf and make some money and do something. But basically, if we look at it, really speaking, the source of a lot of our, I think, stagnation has been the cowbells, because there was really no interest in in developing and in educating people, improving their health, and bringing industry. Because the point is that what we've seen, certainly what we've seen very much from the 80s onwards, has been what is politically important are things like temples, are things like caste issues, in terms of the particularly the OBCs, Mandal and so on. And we see these issues as being really very central to the political discourse, and not so much um, a desire on the part of people to have better public goods and public services. And I think that is now that's quite different in the South. In the South, you do have a constituency for that. Unfortunately, in North we don't, and the problem in the North it's not there. I mean, in Maharashtra, to some extent, there's always been Maharashtra's had a number of great social reform movements, in certainly 30s and 40s, 50s. Unfortunately, it's ended up with this Shiv Sena and these kind of particularist ideologies. But basically, what my argument is that we constantly use this excuse of the Fabian socialists, and because I say that, look, it is more than 35 years since we've gone through liberalization. Now, all the things which these people, a lot of the so-called economic reformists have sought, things like a better use land, better ability to acquire land, or for example, reforms in labor laws and things like that. Um, that those things, the government has had a majority. Governments have had majorities. I mean, Mr. Modi himself has had several majorities. He's not done very much. I mean, he tried to bring in the agricultural things, but without any discussion and without any this thing. And it's like imposing a fiat, imposing some kind of firman or something. You can't bring in a law like that which affects so many millions of people. But the point I'm making is that the cowbelt has been largely responsible for guiding the politics of the age of the political narrative. And what is
mm,
clear in that political narrative is that it's not an ideologic battle between left and right. It's really a question. It's just really an issue between, a sort of, the needs of the Hindu right, which seem to dwell on things which are atavistic, things like temple politics and so on, and the politics of the cow and things like that, and of course conversions, and those seem to be the sort of the kind of the kind of issues, and of course part of them are generated from this whole majoritarianism thing. Because if you look at conversions, it's rather like what the Western in the West, the right wing talk about the great replacement theory. Idea that, for example, Europe is going to be Islamicized in the next couple of decades. I mean, despite the fact that, you know, I mean, for example, in Britain, I think it's about 5 to 6% of the country is Muslim, are Muslims. But I mean, but anyway, in the same
so
way, this
mm,
conversion thing has this argument that somehow Muslims are going to overtake the Hindus
mm.
in terms of the population, which is completely absurd.